The RPG Fanatic show is for hardcore RPG gamers. This video contains spoilers about the games reviewed. You have been warned!
Hello, fellow RPG fanatics. Today we are talking about Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, developed and published by Square-Enix for the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and Microsoft Windows systems. Oh my god, I am actually doing yet another massively multiplayer RPG review and analysis video to go alongside my many other reviews about games like Ragnarok Online, City of Heroes, and World of Warcraft. These reviews always take me a long time to do because they are the result of months, sometimes years, of experience playing the games. But this review is going to be a bit different. Not only is this going to be about a game I am still playing and having a lot of fun playing, but I'm also going to talk at length about why this game is so much better than its original incarnation, even though I never played the first version. And while that may seem like a jerky thing to do, passing judgment on a version of the game I never played, I think you'll come to agree with me that I saved myself a lot of heartache by not playing the first version because my argument for not playing it is based on logic and common sense. Firstly, wow. Just freaking wow. Final Fantasy XIV originally launched in 2010 in a version which is commonly referred to as 1.0 and almost bankrupt Square-Enix when it tanked in the market. I'm not making that up. They had investors selling their shares in the company because the game did so poorly that Square-Enix started to have a financial crisis, which it barely survived. But that is a tale for another day. Then CEO of Square-Enix, Yochi Wada, publicly apologized to the world for the failures, acknowledging that Final Fantasy XIV had damaged the Final Fantasy brand, and game producer Hiromichi Tanaka actually resigned from the company because of how much of a screw-up this game's launch was and what problems it caused for Square Enix. I want you to just take that in for a moment. One of the most senior employees at Square Enix, who had been with the company since its very first title, Death Trap, in 1984, who had been a designer on the early Final Fantasy games, who was the producer of fan favorites like Secret of Mana, Xenogears, and Chrono Cross. This man who had been part of Square even before they were a company. This game was so bad that it resulted in him resigning. That is how freaking bad it was. And why was Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0 so bad? What were the exact reasons? Well, how about having game servers that crash an average 400 times per day? How about allowing your graphic designers to run wild, resulting in every graphical asset having a ridiculously high amount of polygons that frequently cause the game client to crash? And by ridiculous, I mean that a freaking flower pot had the same number of polygons and lines of shader code as a playable character model. And that this company-wide cultural obsession with high-quality graphics frequently caused your computer to freeze unless you had invested into a very expensive, top-of-the-line gaming PC just to play this game. This meant that 1.0 was a very beautiful, unplayable mess. Think that was it? Oh no, we haven't even started. Here are some more issues. How about needing to run off into the middle of nowhere for 20 minutes just to reach the place you need to start farming monsters for a quest? And don't you dare die, because you'll have to make that 20-minute trek back to the zone to start all over again. During version 1.0, the levy quests, which are bound by a daily limit, were the main source of leveling your classes, rather than the main scenario storyline quests we have in version 2.0. And you could only do 4 battle lead quests per day, meaning that if you wanted to play the game solo, you had to be willing to do 1998 EverQuest era style spawn point camping of mobs on the overworld map if you wanted to reach level 50 before the end of the year. If you relied on quests, you would never get there. On top of that, how about the game incorporating a fatigue system where the longer you played, the less experience you earned until eventually you could earn no more experience? Because Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 had this system in place to prevent players from quote-unquote excessively leveling, otherwise known as having fun with the game. Fatigue points only reset at the end of the week, meaning that if you wanted to play the game every day, you were shit out of luck. Unbelievably, the developers actually thought it was a good idea to design a system where the more effort the player put into playing the game, the less progress they would make. This was literally Square Enix punishing their customers for using their product more often. How about the crafting system had no in-game menus telling you what items were needed for crafting recipes, and you had to either look them up on websites from other players who discovered recipes, or randomly try different items until you stumbled upon a combination that resulted in something being created. I mean, this doesn't even scratch the surface of the entire list of things that was wrong with version 1.0. If you want to explore this topic further, there is a huge list of broken gameplay mechanics on a Reddit post I have linked to in my video description. Why was the game so bad? Well, this is just me rambling, but I speculate Final Fantasy XIV was so bad due to the flawed design approach the development team had. Hiromichi Tanaka had also helmed the development of Final Fantasy XI, the first MMO Square created based on the Final Fantasy franchise. Final Fantasy XI was released in 2002, and the game is very much a relic of its time. It's known for its grindfesty EverQuest era style of gameplay. Its main claim to fame in gaming pop culture is that it sports an unbeatable boss called Absolute Virtue, that is best known as the boss who causes players to puke in real life. I can't make this stuff up. In a well-reported case, a raid of players spent 18 hours fighting the Absolute Virtue boss non-stop, until some of the players started experiencing extreme nausea from all the energy drinks they were no doubt consuming to stay awake and alert during the raid, and some were reported as actually passing out at their keyboards. Absolute Virtue is not only the destroyer of a raid's in-game characters, but also a slayer of the players' actual bodies. And Hiromichi Tanaka's team of developers sincerely believed encounter design like this was a good thing for their game. After all, Final Fantasy XI is the most profitable game Square Enix has made due to the monthly subscription fee. And the game does have a small but loyal population of older players who still love the hardcore challenge of playing Final Fantasy XI, which has kept it afloat for many years. However, Final Fantasy XI is not a newbie-friendly game. Absolute Virtue is just a notable example of its design flaws. The game is built around the idea that it should take years to do basic things like upgrading your class weapon, and the ultra-rich legacy players who have accumulated hordes of Zenny over the decades make it hard for a new player to meaningfully participate in the game's economy. Final Fantasy XI has an antiquated style of gameplay where a player must choose between advancing his in-game character or having a real life outside the game world, and cannot possibly have both. This cat-assy design approach is no longer something mainstream gamers accept. Yet Hiromichi Tanaka's team either did not seem to understand this, or they simply did not care. The point is that they designed Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 to be an even more hardcore version of Final Fantasy XI. So, how did Square Enix fix all these problems and make the game's relaunch, version 2.0, so good it actually pulled them out of an anticipated financial loss for that quarter? How did they make a game that was so hated in the market become its darling? Well, first they brought in Naoki Yoshida to replace Hiromichi Tanaka as lead producer. Naoki Yoshida, who also goes by the moniker Yoshi P, who is about 10 years younger than Hiromichi Tanaka, was a relatively new employee at Square Enix compared to Tanaka, having first joined the company in 2004, but was no novice to the game industry. He had worked for Hudson Soft for many years in the Bomberman series, so he brought with him a great deal of experience working on multiplayer games. Furthermore, Yoshi P was an avid MMO player from the late 90s, having played everything from Ultima Online to EverQuest to Guild Wars 2. Yoshi P's experience as a hardcore MMO gamer proved instrumental to redesigning Final Fantasy XIV with such modern MMO design concepts as having branching storyline quests be the primary leveling mechanic, not adding fatigue systems to reduce players' experience points until they could no longer play, and not designing world maps to be so massive it took 15 minutes of running to do basic things like walk from one end of the city to the next. Basically, under Yoshipi's direction, the development team removed all the things that punished players for playing the game, which was the fundamental problem with version 1.0. They also made other changes to the game client and server, such as using a graphics engine that didn't require you to buy a $6,000 gaming PC in order to participate in a raid. I have to hand it to Square Enix for making a bold and very courageous move. They admitted the game sucked, and they vowed to rebuild it from scratch with a new, better design. Rather than just insist the original vision was right for the market, they responded to the demands of the market. I cannot stress how unusual this is in the massively multiplayer online RPG industry, where developer egos tend to override common sense. And another thing worthy of praising Square about, they even managed to successfully relaunch the game despite brazenly ripping off the general concept of World of Warcraft's Cataclysm expansion. In Cataclysm, the dragon Deathwing bursts from the ground to ravage the world, allowing the developers to justify completely altering the level design of the overworld map to allow for better quest chain designs. Similarly, Final Fantasy XIV transitioned into a realm reborn by having Bahamut wrecking cities and landscapes, an event known in-game as the Calamity. I imagine Yoshipi must have said to Yochi Wada, "Hey, if Blizzard got away with having their series Best Known Dragon destroy the world so they could solve their design problems, why can't we do the same thing? We got a big badass dragon in our game franchise too, freaking Bahamut. We can actually one-up Blizzard by having Bahamut burst out of the moon and royally fuck everything up, and it'll be our own Cataclysm. We'll call it the Calamity, which is the first synonym for Cataclysm that I see in our English dictionary." And I further imagine Yochi Wada slapped Yoshipi across the face and shouted, "I love this plan! I'm excited to be a part of it! Let's do it!" as he ran into a board meeting to face off against the disgruntled shareholders. Seriously though, their plan worked spectacularly well. Bahamut screwing everything up infused the game with some much needed series star power and drama, and allowed for all the game quests to be rewritten to focus on the need for the different city factions to work together as part of a storyline that united them behind common causes. I am glad that A Realm Reborn has addressed almost all the major issues with the first incarnation of Final Fantasy XIV. Now let's talk about the setting and gameplay. As mentioned before, Final Fantasy XIV was designed almost as a recreation of the Final Fantasy XI world of Vana'diel, only this time called Hydaline, a world that sounds extremely similar to... You know what, I'm not even going to go there. Some of the major similarities between Final Fantasy XIV and XI are that the same beast tribes from XI appear as enemy factions in XIV, and the same exact playable races from XI are also carried over, although they have been given new names. For example, the diminutive Teru are now called Lalafels. But if you want to be honest about it, regardless of what the in-game text says, the race names are actually human, elf, gnome, and orcs. The gnomes and orcs just look prettier here, and sometimes more fabulous. But the playable characters basically conform to a stereotypical Dungeons & Dragons playable race chart, except there's no dwarves, although possibly Lalafels, or a reference to the Final Fantasy IV dwarves who used to shout lolly. You know what? No, I'm not even going to put so much thought into this. There's no way these guys are a reference to Final Fantasy IV. The 2.0 version of Final Fantasy XIV is still set in the fictional, open, and persistent world of Hydaline, which, although it has been completely restyled by Yoshida and his team, is the same world from 1.0 that has merely undergone a World of Warcraft-style cataclysm shift due to the destruction wrought by Bahamut. Unlike the initial world design, the land is now divided into 3 continents, which are further segregated into cities. The story starts up in an era after the destruction of the Orzia continent, and revolves around rebuilding the cities. Final Fantasy XIV features a new enemy race named Ascian, who take a more center stage role in the plot of the main scenario, alongside the original enemy factions including the Garleon Empire and Beastmen tribes. A Realm Reborn has also added a lot of new quests, several raids, such as the 24-man Crystal Tower and the 8-man Binding Coil of Bahamut, as well as PvP arena and team faction battles frontlines. This is a good time to talk about the music. Like all great Final Fantasy titles, many of the game's soundtracks were composed by Nobuo Uematsu, and this includes the modernized versions of the Final Fantasy III music used in the Crystal Tower dungeons. I consider Nobuo Uematsu's scores to be a critical part of what makes a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game, and while I don't feel all of these themes are his strongest works, they are still legions apart from the musical garbage that tends to appear in other MMOs. Additional music has also been created by other celebrated Square-Enix composers. Suffice it to say that Final Fantasy XIV has one of the best soundtracks of any MMO I've played. Story-wise, I think it has a very strong plot as far as most MMOs are concerned. The pace of the story never seems to drag too much, and you are never not feeling like you are engaging in heroic pursuits. The general idea is that you are one of the mythical warriors of light chosen by the primal god deity of the planet, also named Hideline, and you are fated to battle against the forces of darkness represented by the Ascians and their puppets. The Garleon Empire is a military nation in league with the Ascians that is trying to take over the world, and I particularly like the Garleon Empire as they are a shout out to the Empire from Final Fantasy VI, right down to the use of Magitech armor and the design of the soldiers' uniforms. It's even possible to get a Magitech armor mount once you've completed the main storyline, which I think is really neat. I won't try to ruin much more of the story for you. It really is quite epic, and I feel that it is a genuine Final Fantasy storyline that is worthy of the brand. Let's talk about characters and customization. Final Fantasy XIV allows you to highly customize your character with your in-game name, gender, race, starting class, and various facial features. You create your character by choosing from the 4 disciplines including War, Magic, Hand, and Land. Each discipline has its own character classes with their respective jobs and weapons that are unique to each class. Each class is able to unlock an upgraded version called a job, and this is achieved by completing a unique storyline quest that results in the acquisition of a job crystal, an element borrowed from Final Fantasy V. Like all MMOs, after completing a quest, killing a monster, or defeating an enemy, you are rewarded with experience points, which levels up your classes. You can level up all of the available classes on the same character, as the game supports instant class changes. For example, I have leveled up several crafting classes, as well as the Gladiator and Arcanist, whose job crystals are Paladin and Summoner/Scholar, Summoner being a DPS World of Warcraft Warlock style of character, and Scholar being a pet-based healing class. Paladin, naturally, is a tanking class. I would list all the classes in the game right now, but honestly, they are going to add a lot more in the next expansion, which as of the time of making this review is coming out in 3 months, so this information would become outdated. Right now there are classic classes like Summoners, Black Mages, White Mages, Monks, and Dragoons, and these classes make up the bulk of the player base. The game does have a system for enhancing the stats of items by slotting Materia into them, but to be perfectly honest, calling the system Materia is a disservice to Final Fantasy VII. The system is more similar to World of Warcraft's gem socketing because Materia does not add any skills, nor does it improve the effectiveness of them. Currently, the Materia in Final Fantasy XIV gives small stat bonuses, and the most powerful items in the game do not have Materia sockets anyway, which makes the Materia system something I have never even bothered messing with. Supposedly the system is being redesigned for the next expansion, so I'm waiting to see what the changes will be before I go too crazy about my criticism of it. I do think the system for acquiring Materia needs more tuning. Materia is created by using an item enough in battle that your character obtains a spirit bond with that item, allowing you to convert it into a randomly determined Materia. Because the rate of spirit bonding is tied to the amount of experience points you earn, this system encourages players to enter high-level dungeons wearing ratty gear, which reduces their healing or damage output, making the dungeon harder for the other party members to complete. I can understand why the developers designed the system this way. They wanted to make items that convert into desirable Materia have value in the marketplace, and while it does seem to help the economy somewhat, I think the social conflict spirit bonding in in-game dungeons caused is not worth keeping the system the way it is. Another aspect of the game to talk about is the guild system, called free companies here. Free companies level up by earning points based on member activities, such as crafting high-quality items or completing quests. As free companies reach new levels, they unlock new abilities, such as guild-wide buffs that increase experience gain or reduce item durability wear, and eventually allow for the purchase of a guild estate that can be completely customized with furniture items and house special sections for crafting or engaging in Guild Estate exclusive content like Guardian and Chocobo raising. Apparently they are adding the ability to construct airships in the next expansion, and I'm really looking forward to that. As far as for how difficult the endgame content is, I think it's fairly balanced. The raids are easier than the stuff I experienced in vanilla World of Warcraft, or even what I encountered in Wrath of the Lich King World of Warcraft, but the average skill level of the player base is a lot lower than what I recall from WoW. This is because Final Fantasy XIV has a lot of brand new MMO players, most likely due to the console versions making the game more accessible to younger generations who don't have a top-of-the-line gaming PC. There are also hard mode dungeons and extreme mode primals, where you face off against powered up versions of Final Fantasy VII monsters like Ifrit, Titan, Garuda, Leviathan, and Ramuh. The most challenging content in the game is probably the very last turns of Bahamut's Coil, and completing the extremely long and daunting quest chain for Zodiac Brave weapons. This quest allows you to obtain the ultimate weapon for your job, a relic weapon, which in its final form allows you to customize some of the stats it has to make your ideal class weapon. Let's talk about the graphics and controls. As far as the different versions of the game client go, the PlayStation 3 version of the game, while playable, does have graphical glitches and performance issues, which is noticeable in raids or when FMVs load. Almost all of the gameplay you see in this video was recorded by me on the PlayStation 3. By contrast, the PlayStation 4 and Windows versions had a kind of upscaled graphics quality that is very impressive, but doesn't require a state-of-the-art graphics card to handle. I can safely confirm that with these advancements, A Realm Reborn has become one of the most graphically advanced MMORPGs made so far. The controls of Final Fantasy XIV have just gone to a new level, as it is now fully compatible with keyboard and mouse, even on console versions. Apart from that, the gamepad controls have also been tweaked for those who are more comfortable with traditional controllers than mouse and keyboard, which is an improvement, I hear, from the version 1.0 version of the game. Other than the above described characteristics, the user interface, armory systems, and battle systems have also been highly improved to make the game more immersive. After evaluating almost every aspect of Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn, I would definitely recommend this game to massively multiplayer online RPG lovers, especially if you are a fan of the Final Fantasy franchise. It is one of the most fun online RPGs I have played in many years, and I highly suggest it.
Why hello there, gamers, it is I, the Student Sword. I have a question to ask you. Da-da-da-da. What is your favorite Final Fantasy game, and why? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching the RPG Fanatic Show.